It all happened so quickly. One moment, everything was normal, and the next, the sharp smell of burning filled the air, followed by the sight of angry orange flames licking at the edges of the room. My first instinct was to make sure everyone was safe. Sarah, my partner for many years, was there, along with her assistant, a young man named Mark. In the sudden chaos, as smoke began to fill the space, Sarah reacted without hesitation, throwing herself in front of Mark to shield him from the immediate danger. Even as I saw the angry red marks appearing on her arms from the heat, she insisted that Mark needed to get to the hospital first. It made sense. He was her responsibility at work. But amidst the thick, acrid smoke that stung my eyes and choked my lungs, I lost consciousness, collapsing onto the floor. The next thing I knew, everything went black. I woke up in the stark, clinical environment of the intensive care unit. The rhythmic beeping of machines was the first sound I registered. A nurse told me I had been out for a month. A whole month of my life had vanished into a blur of pain and unconsciousness. It was a slow, arduous journey back to reality, each breath a struggle, each movement a reminder of my body's fragility. When I finally opened my eyes and could focus properly, my first thought was to reach for my phone. There was a message from Sarah. It wasn't a question about my well-being, not a simple, "I'm so glad you're awake." It was a request, an instruction. She wrote that Mark had also been hospitalized these past few days, and she wanted me to make him his favorite soup and bring it over to him. A cold weight settled in my chest. In that moment, lying weak and vulnerable in a hospital bed, I saw Sarah with a clarity that had eluded me for so long. The day I was finally discharged from the hospital, my eyes still sensitive and red from the smoke, I made 2 phone calls. The first was to the fertility clinic to cancel our upcoming IVF appointment, something we had been planning for months. The second was to an airline to book a flight abroad, leaving in just 3 days. A sense of finality washed over me as I confirmed the booking. Back home, a palpable distance grew between Sarah and me. We moved around each other in our shared space like polite strangers, our lives suddenly on separate trajectories. Just as the confirmation text for my flight purchase arrived on my phone, Sarah called me. Her voice was sharp, laced with accusation. "Ben, what did you buy that cost so much? Do you think money just appears out of thin air? Everything about IVF is expensive. Do you even still want to have a child or not?" Faced with her immediate interrogation, a strange sense of calm settled over me. I had just spent a month fighting for my life in a hospital bed, and she hadn't even bothered to call and check on me. Now, the moment I spent a couple of $1,000 on a plane ticket for myself, she was quick to reprimand me. Standing at the entrance of the hospital where I had just been released, I took a deep breath and said, my voice steady despite the turmoil inside, "Yeah, I don't want to do IVF anymore." There was a brief pause on the other end of the line, a moment of silence. Then Sarah laughed, a short, sarcastic sound that held no real amusement. "Oh, so you're throwing a tantrum now, are you?" she said dismissively. "It's just a bowl of soup for Mark. Why are you making such a big deal out of it? He's young and capable. He helps me so much at work. Look at you. You're not exactly 18 anymore." Her words, though delivered with a casual, almost bored tone, still felt like tiny shards of glass piercing my skin. Before, I would have become flustered, tried to explain my feelings, to justify my actions. But seeing her rush to protect Mark from the fire, without even a fleeting glance in my direction as I lay unconscious in the smoke, something fundamental within me had shifted. A part of me had gone numb. Thanks to Sarah's offhand remark, a memory surfaced, clear and sharp. She and Mark had been close since they were teenagers, around 18 years old. That was 12 years ago. 12 years in which they had always seemed ready and willing to start a family. But for some reason, Sarah had never been able to conceive. We had tried IVF, gone through the emotional and physical roller coaster of appointments and treatments, yet she would always find reasons to cancel, often without even discussing it with me beforehand. Now, a cold, hard realization dawned upon me. Perhaps even fate itself was trying to tell me that Sarah and I were not meant to build a future together. I hung up the phone, the abrupt click echoing in the sudden silence. With a heavy heart, I walked over to the bedside table and picked up my wedding ring and the small, dried-up bouquet of flowers from our wedding. Without looking at them, I dropped them into the waste bin, a symbolic gesture of letting go. During the entire month I spent in the hospital, Sarah hadn't visited me even once. A few days after the fire, a small vase of red roses had been delivered, along with a card. The words written inside were simple. "Love you as before." For a brief moment, a flicker of something resembling warmth had stirred within me. But then I happened to see Sarah's latest post on social media. It was a picture of Mark standing amidst a breathtaking display of what looked like 1,000 red roses, a wide, genuine smile lighting up his face. The caption read, "Thanks to the best CEO for the get well gift and for taking such good care of me these past weeks." Just a moment later, Sarah had commented below the picture, "It's only right to take care of you. Seeing you in pain broke my heart too. Too bad the card got lost. I'll write you a proper letter next time." The pieces clicked into place with a sickening certainty. The words on the card I received, the roses that had been sent to my room, they were leftovers, a mere afterthought from a much grander gesture meant for Mark. And my place in Sarah's heart was clearly just as insignificant and disposable. A taxi pulled up outside our house just as Sarah was heading out the door. Seeing me getting out of the car with luggage in hand, her face immediately hardened into a scowl. "Ben? Where on earth have you been this past month? The house is a mess, and you haven't even bothered to clean up. You don't want to work, and now I have to do all the chores too?" I was about to ask if she had somehow forgotten that I had been at the fire scene as well, that I had just spent the last month recovering in the hospital, when her phone rang. It was Mark. "Sarah, where are you? I miss you." The moment she answered, Sarah's entire demeanor shifted, her face softened, and a genuine, warm smile spread across her lips. She walked out onto the porch, her voice light and cheerful as she spoke to him, reminding me to clean up the house as she went. Even as she walked away, her happy laughter drifted back into the quiet street. My hand instinctively clenched into a tight fist. In that moment, I finally understood my true place in Sarah's world. Years by her side, through good times and bad, never a complaint. But I simply couldn't continue living like this any longer. 3 attempts at entering the code at the front door failed before I realized Sarah had changed it. I sent her a text message asking for the new code, but there was no response. In the biting cold of the evening, I stood outside for 3 long hours until she finally returned. Her voice was laced with irritation as she rattled off the new code. 1024. If you can't even remember that, maybe you shouldn't come back. I don't have time for your problems. Only when she said the numbers did I realize their significance. It was Mark's birthday. I remembered because when Sarah had posted a picture of them celebrating his birthday a few years ago, Sarah and I had had a huge argument. I had felt hurt by her constant prioritizing of Mark, and we hadn't spoken for 3 days afterward. How utterly ridiculous. Over 10 years I had lived in this house, and not a single number related to me was part of the code. Yet, in the relatively short time she had known Mark, she had given him something I had always longed for, a significant and meaningful place in her life. 2.5 days left until my flight. Returning inside the house, I opened a suitcase and began to pack my few belongings. The closet was overflowing with Sarah's clothes, taking up the vast majority of the space. I realized then how little room my own things occupied. I used to be so careful with money, always saving for our future, for her dreams. In the winter, I would even forego buying myself a new coat to save a little extra. But later, I had discovered that all that saved money had somehow found its way to Mark. With a sigh that carried the weight of years of unspoken disappointments, I folded my small pile of clothes and placed them carefully into the suitcase. A text message from Sarah popped up on my phone. "I booked the IVF appointment for tomorrow morning. Make sure you get enough rest tonight. Stop acting like the world owes you something this time, and just make it work. I'm starting to think you're the one who can't get pregnant." I replied with a simple, "Got it," offering no further explanation. After all, I had already canceled the appointment, and I would be leaving the country soon. Whether or not she could have a baby now was no longer my concern. After tidying up the few things that were mine, I suddenly remembered the IVF consent forms and other documents in the nightstand drawer. I picked them up for a quick look, a sense of morbid curiosity washing over me. That's when I noticed a few condoms missing from the box. I distinctly remembered Sarah buying them a while ago, and we hadn't used any since we had been struggling to conceive. Sarah had always seemed to believe that the problem lay with me, and over time, she had lost almost all interest in any kind of intimacy. I opened my phone and scrolled through Sarah's social media. Sure enough, I found a picture she had posted just yesterday. It was a casual shot of Mark sitting on our living room couch, looking completely at home. A wave of nausea washed over me. Driven by a strange, unsettling urge, I rummaged through the bedroom trash can. Finally, at the very bottom, hidden beneath tissues and other discarded items, I found the undeniable evidence. Used condoms, clearly for 2 people. I collapsed onto the floor, the reality of the situation hitting me with the force of a physical blow. My mind went blank, but my heart ached with a deep, quiet sorrow. I had initially hoped for a clean, amicable separation. Clearly, that was no longer an option. I picked up my phone and called the fertility clinic, telling them that I would not be attending any future IVF appointments. The staff member on the other end sounded surprised. "Are you sure about this, sir? If you don't come in, it will mean canceling the entire process. All the efforts and data we've collected will be lost. Are you absolutely certain you want to proceed with this?" Staring at the incriminating trash on the floor, I felt no hesitation whatsoever. "Yes," I said firmly. "I'm sure. Please cancel everything." Then I messaged my lawyer, instructing him to begin drafting the divorce papers immediately. Over a decade of feelings for Sarah seemed to evaporate in that moment, like smoke dissipating in the wind. Sarah didn't come home at all that night. So when I saw her sitting on the couch the next day, casually scrolling through her phone as if nothing unusual had happened, I was surprised. Sarah, noticing I was awake, looked up and said sarcastically, "Well, look who finally decided to get out of bed. It's almost noon. Anyone would think I married a complete slob. Look at Mark. He's been up for hours, already working hard. You're so incredibly lazy." A small, humorless laugh escaped my lips. I used to wake up early every single morning to make her breakfast before she went to work. And for just one day of sleeping in, after everything that had happened, she still felt the need to insult me. Before, her words would have instantly ignited a fire of anger within me, but now I simply walked past her, ignoring whatever she said. Sarah seemed taken aback by my indifference, and her face darkened briefly before she spoke again. After I had showered and gotten dressed, she gestured for me to sit beside her on the couch. Her expression was unreadable, almost hesitant, yet she remained silent. I frowned slightly, feeling a growing sense of annoyance, and finally asked, "What do you want to say?" Sarah finally broke the silence. "I can't make it to the IVF appointment this afternoon." Without even thinking, the words just tumbled out of my mouth. It's fine anyway. I already canceled it. Her attendance, or lack thereof, simply didn't matter to me anymore. Sarah looked briefly stunned by my response. I didn't need to guess what she was thinking. Before, any mention of canceling an appointment would have led to a heated argument, filled with her excuses and my frustrations. But now, all she got was my complete and utter indifference. "Fine," she said, her voice flat and devoid of emotion. Sarah leaned closer, almost disbelievingly asking, "You're not even mad?" I chuckled lightly, genuinely confused as to why I should be angry. I simply didn't love her anymore, so what was the point of getting upset? I simply nodded in response. Sarah seemed somewhat satisfied by my lack of reaction and patted my head patronizingly, a gesture that now filled me with disgust, making me instinctively turn away. Obliviously, she continued, "You should always be like this. Getting upset over every little thing is so exhausting. Honestly, only I could put up with you. Anyone else would have gone completely mad by now." I looked down silently at my phone, browsed through travel guides, offering no response. As she finished her sentence, I merely said, "Got it?" Then quickly got dressed and headed out of the house. The lawyer had just informed me via text message that the divorce papers were ready for me to pick up. Initially, I had planned to spend the day resting and pick up the divorce papers tomorrow. But with Sarah back in the house, her presence felt suffocating, and I felt a restless urge to just get things moving. The cafe where I was meeting my lawyer was conveniently located nearby. After retrieving the stack of official-looking documents, Sarah soon texted me, her message appearing on my phone screen. Like always, she was asking what she should cook for dinner that night. Normally, I would have rushed out to the grocery store to buy whatever ingredients she requested. Sarah had very specific tastes, quite different from my own. She disliked onions and cilantro, two ingredients I particularly enjoyed. But if she didn't like them, they never made an appearance in my cooking. Yet now, with the divorce papers safely tucked away in my bag, I found myself at the grocery store, instinctively grabbing all the things I liked, without a second thought for her preferences. By the time I returned from the store, the sky outside was dark. As I opened the front door, I was immediately met with the sound of laughter. Sarah and Mark turned to look at me, Sarah's hand casually resting on Mark's leg. I pretended not to notice the intimate gesture, slipping off my shoes at the entrance. Sarah came over to help me with my jacket, her voice sounding slightly impatient. "Why are you so late? Mark and I are absolutely starving." Seeing the smug look on Mark's face made me frown slightly. Apologetically, he said, "Sorry, Ben. Sarah told me she was cooking, so I came over. If I'm in the way, I can leave." He made a move to stand up, but Sarah gently pushed him back down onto the couch, her eyebrows furrowed in mild annoyance. "What are you even saying? Ben can cook. No trouble at all, right, Ben?" I placed the bags of groceries down on the kitchen counter, not wanting to engage in their awkward back-and-forth banter. Calmly, I replied, "If you want to eat, just stay." Their faces lit up instantly, a look of somewhat disbelieving relief washing over them. Sarah asked me cautiously, "You're not mad, are you?" I simply nodded, focusing on unpacking the vegetables from the grocery bags. Sarah didn't bother me any further after that, and went back to playfully teasing Mark on the couch. My flight was scheduled for the next morning, so this was technically our last meal together in this house. It felt like bringing a definitive close to our decade-long relationship. So I decided to put extra care and effort into making this final meal. By the time the last dish was served and placed on the table, a strange quiet had settled over the room. I stepped out of the kitchen to see Sarah gently covering Mark with a blanket, as he had apparently fallen asleep on the couch. My gaze lingered for a moment, and I felt a faint, almost imperceptible pang of bitterness. When Sarah saw me step out of the kitchen, her expression soured slightly. She pulled me back into the kitchen, chiding me in a low voice. You said you weren't mad. Why did it take you so incredibly long to cook? Calmly, I explained. I made a few more complex dishes tonight, so it just took a little longer than usual. Without waiting for her to respond, I sat down at the table and began to eat alone. Sarah was already in a slightly foul mood, and seeing the dishes I had prepared, liberally garnished with green onions, only seemed to make it worse. Just as I picked up a bite of rice, she suddenly snapped. She grabbed all the food I had painstakingly prepared and unceremoniously dumped it into the kitchen trash can. Sarah was visibly furious, but she kept her voice low so as not to wake Mark, who was still asleep in the living room. She pointed at me accusingly. "Ben, did you do that on purpose?" I didn't answer her question, just looked with a sense of regret at the discarded food in the bin. I had spent the entire evening cooking, and I hadn't even managed to taste a single bite before Sarah had thrown it all away. I sighed quietly to myself, thinking perhaps this was just another sign of our inevitable separation. Seeing my calm and somewhat resigned expression, Sarah showed a brief flicker of panic in her eyes. I think she might have wanted to apologize, but her pride seemed to prevent her from doing so. Instead, she went back into the living room, gently woke Mark, and then left with him, the door closing behind them in silence. I cleaned up the mess in the kitchen and washed my hands before grabbing my phone. A notification popped up. Sarah had updated her social media profile at 1 a.m. She had posted a picture of a beautifully arranged table laden with delicious-looking food. It wasn't until I read Mark's comment below the picture that I realized she had made it all for him. A late-night snack after their outing. I chuckled bitterly to myself, and a few stray tears started to fall down my cheeks as I finished cleaning up the remnants of our last meal together. I quickly wiped them away, but my cheeks already felt damp. It was funny how it didn't really feel like I loved her anymore, yet it still managed to sting. The next morning, I left the stack of divorce papers in plain sight on the kitchen table. On top of them, I placed a short note that read, "I have no regrets about loving you all these years. I've canceled the IVF. Don't try to find me. Goodbye for good." Just as I finished writing the last word, I received a message from Sarah. She apologized, saying, "I was wrong last night. I've been neglecting you these past few days. I'll cook tonight and make it all up to you, okay?" With a sarcastic laugh that held no real humor, I ignored the message and turned off my phone. Then, grabbing my luggage, I walked out of the house and headed to the airport, boarding a plane that would take me far away. The few hours spent on the plane were enough time for a flood of memories from the past decade to resurface. The more I thought about it, the more the younger version of myself seemed naive and almost pathetic. In the early years of our relationship, I had moved to her city, leaving behind everything I knew. Aside from her, I knew absolutely no one. So when she asked me to take care of things at home so she could focus on starting her own business, I had agreed without any hesitation. When her business eventually failed, I didn't even think twice before giving her a significant portion of my savings, $200,000, to help her get back on her feet. But as her company grew and became successful, she seemed to completely forget about my sacrifices and often criticized me for doing nothing around the house. She would constantly praise Mark for all the help and support he provided, both professionally and personally. At the time, her words had made me feel small and insignificant, like I wasn't contributing enough. As Sarah and Mark's bond seemed to deepen over the years, I had developed a constant fear of being left alone, so I had pretended not to notice the subtle shifts in their dynamic, the way they looked at each other, the little inside jokes. Painful memories surfaced and gnawed at my heart, leaving behind a dull ache of sorrow and regret. It wasn't until the plane finally touched down on the runway that I managed to pull myself out of the swirling vortex of memories. Sarah probably thought I would stay at home, moping and waiting for her to come back and cook me dinner, as if nothing had changed. But in reality, I was already in Finland, a world away from her. Once I was off the plane and had collected my luggage, I turned on my phone. Immediately, a barrage of messages flooded in from Sarah. She kept calling, leaving angry voicemails, demanding to know where I was and why I had left. Even Mark had sent me a text message, scolding me for my behavior towards Sarah. I glanced at the messages, a cold, humorless laugh escaping my lips. Then, without a second thought, I blocked both their numbers. I wasn't planning on staying in Finland for very long, just a few days to clear my head, so I did some quick research online and found a small, cozy lodge run by people who had emigrated from back home. As I hailed a taxi from the airport, I felt a sense of warmth and familiarity, like I was already closer to home, even before arriving at the lodge. But there was a slight hiccup. Having just arrived in a new country, I hadn't yet had the chance to exchange any of my money into the local currency. Feeling slightly awkward and unsure of what to do, I stood outside the lodge, my luggage beside me. A young woman who was checking in at the reception desk noticed my predicament. Speaking fluent Finnish, she quickly explained the situation to the taxi driver and then generously paid for my ride. Feeling incredibly grateful, I pulled out my phone, intending to repay her immediately. When I looked up to thank her properly, I realized with a jolt of surprise that she was Mandy, the lawyer who had so efficiently drafted my divorce papers. "Mandy, what are you doing here?" I asked, genuinely surprised. She seemed to recognize me and laughed. "Oh, hi, Ben. After months of intense work on a big case, I just needed to get away for a little break." I nodded in understanding. As we walked into the lodge together, I noticed that she was also traveling alone. Just as I was about to say something, Mandy turned to me and asked with a friendly smile, "Well, since we're both here and clearly have some time on our hands, how about we grab some dinner together?" Shyly, I nodded and said, "Sure, that sounds nice." Just as Mandy was about to say something else, my phone suddenly rang, displaying an unfamiliar number. Apologizing, I stepped into a quiet corner of the lobby to take the call. It was Sarah on the other end, using a different phone number, no doubt. I listened silently, a wave of weary exasperation washing over me, as Sarah's angry voice surged through the phone. "Ben, why are you always so moody? What is going on this time? Just because I didn't go with you for that last IVF appointment, you're really going to go through with this divorce?" I had foolishly hoped that she might have gained some perspective, some understanding after I had left. But it turned out I was just kidding myself. I had clearly overestimated how much I actually mattered to her. Annoyed and not wanting to engage in another pointless argument, I simply hung up the phone. I grabbed my luggage and went back to my room to finally get some much-needed rest. Lying in bed, the whole situation felt surreal. Finland was supposed to be such a romantic and beautiful place. Over the years, I had mentioned to Sarah countless times how much I wanted to visit. She had always brushed it off, citing work commitments and lack of time. But later, I had seen her post on social media about how she had always dreamed of seeing the snow. And then suddenly, it was a business trip to Mount Fuji with Mark. They had stood under the beautiful cherry blossoms, holding hands, making promises to never be apart. I tried to clear my mind of those painful images and finally drifted off to sleep. 10 long years seemed to flash by in my dreams like a disjointed movie. Waking up, all of it felt like distant memories, fading at the edges. I sat by the window, watching the soft hues of the sunset paint the sky, when my phone buzzed with a text message from Mandy, asking if I was still up for dinner. I replied with a quick, "Okay," and was about to put my phone away when a video from Sarah popped up on another social media platform. The caption read, "Only an idiot would refuse such a patient and caring woman. Maybe he just sprained his ankle." In the video, Sarah, who was usually so meticulous and neat, was kneeling down, gently putting shoes on Mark. I smirked at the sheer irony of it all. He was wrong about one thing, though. Sarah had never been that patient or caring with me. Her patience and her care were always reserved for Mark. I changed my clothes and headed downstairs to the lobby. Mandy had been waiting for me there for quite a while. Feeling a bit guilty for making her wait, I said, "Sorry for keeping you waiting. Something unexpected came up." Mandy just waved her hand dismissively, saying it was no big deal. Relieved, I let it go. We decided to go to a popular local restaurant that the lodge staff had recommended. Only when we got there did we realize that the restaurant had another, more suggestive name, the Date Spot. We both chuckled a little, brushed it off as a coincidence, and went inside, trying to act as natural as possible. While we were waiting for our food to arrive, Mandy shared her travel plans with me. I was quite surprised to discover that her itinerary closely matched my own. Our next stop was also Switzerland. It felt like a sign, and we quickly decided to become travel buddies, agreeing to navigate the rest of our trips together. The more we talked that evening, the more I realized how much we actually had in common. Just as I was starting to feel genuinely happy that I wouldn't be traveling completely alone anymore, two familiar figures walked into the restaurant. It was Sarah and Mark. They looked so obviously in love, holding on to each other as if they were already a married couple. They were smiling sweetly, completely engrossed in their own little world, until they spotted me sitting at a table with Mandy. Sarah, noticing a woman sitting across from me, stormed over without saying a single word. Standing directly in front of our table, she demanded, "Who is she?" I didn't even have a chance to respond before Mark, who was standing slightly behind her, interjected with a tone of feigned concern. "Alan, are you still mad at Sarah? So, you're already out with another woman?" Mandy, sitting across from me, looked a bit lost and confused by the sudden confrontation. I couldn't help but roll my eyes at the dramatic duo. Sarah, seeing that I wasn't planning on offering any explanation, suddenly lifted her hand in anger, as if she was about to strike Mandy. Before her hand could make contact, I instinctively grabbed Sarah's wrist, a surge of disgust and protective anger rising within me. "Sarah, stop acting completely crazy," I said firmly, letting go of her hand without even bothering to see her reaction. Sarah looked genuinely shocked by my unexpected move. She stood there, stunned, a look of utter disbelief plastered across her face. Mandy, clearly annoyed by the whole situation, tried to gently pull me away from the escalating drama. But Sarah clung to my sleeve, looking confused and almost childlike. "Alan," she asked, her voice trembling slightly, "did you really leave me for her?" Before I could even formulate an answer, Mark, who had been watching the whole scene unfold, stepped forward, looking at Sarah with a mixture of concern and exasperation. "Dear Sarah, why are you acting like this? Didn't you say you'd be with me once you finally divorced him? Why are you hesitating now?" Hearing those words, I yanked my arm free from Sarah's grasp with a bitter laugh. I had foolishly thought they would finally embrace, openly celebrating their long-awaited love. But unexpectedly, Sarah turned and slapped Mark hard across the face, saying with a surprising amount of force, "What utter nonsense! I would only ever marry Alan. You clearly took my jokes way too seriously." I didn't care to witness any more of their bizarre interaction. I simply took Mandy's hand and walked away from the table. We didn't stop walking until the increasingly loud and dramatic voices behind us finally faded into the background noise. I let go of her hand, noticing that her cheeks were slightly flushed. "Maybe we walked a little too fast," I said awkwardly, trying to break the tension. Mandy didn't say anything, keeping her head down. Thinking she might be upset by the scene, I quickly added, "With all that unexpected drama, we didn't even get to finish our meal. How about we find another place? My treat. I heard there's this great little restaurant in another part of Finland. Would you like to check it out with me?" Finally looking up at me, Mandy offered a small, caring smile and said, "It must have been really rough dealing with all that back there." I paused for a moment, feeling a wave of emotion wash over me. All those years I had spent with Sarah, I had never received even an ounce of genuine sympathy or understanding. Yet, this woman I had only known for a few days seemed genuinely concerned for my well-being. I pushed away the sudden wave of sadness, pretending it didn't bother me as much as it did, and said, "It's okay, we're divorced now. Let's just go eat. I'm starving." Mandy, sensing that I was trying to appear okay, seemed to drop her own slightly subdued mood. She playfully grabbed my sleeve and led me towards the exit, chattering about random things to cheer me up. It was a feeling I had never truly experienced with Sarah. My heart felt a warmth I hadn't felt in a long time. After a pleasant dinner at a quieter restaurant, we headed back to the inn together. We made plans to spend the following day exploring Finland and then catch a flight to Switzerland. We agreed to wake up early the next morning to try and catch a glimpse of the famous Northern Lights. The next day, Mandy and I spent a busy afternoon setting up a small tent in the snow, a little ways away from the lodge, hoping for the best view of the aurora borealis. As dusk settled and darkness enveloped the landscape, the ethereal green and purple lights of the Northern Lights slowly began to dance across the sky. It was a truly breathtaking spectacle. I instinctively snapped a quick photo with my phone and posted it on social media. Mandy, who was clearly excited to witness this natural wonder, pulled me over to a small campfire that had been set up nearby. We gazed up at the mesmerizing lights, making silent wishes together. In the past, I might have wished for Sarah's happiness, for my family's well-being, and for my business to continue to thrive, but now, as I looked up at the swirling lights, my only wish was to see my parents again, to somehow mend the years of silence that had stretched between us. Mandy noticed my shift in mood after I made my silent wish. She looked at me curiously and asked, "What's wrong, Ben?" I forced a small smile and decided to share a secret I had been keeping to myself for years. Years ago, when I was first dating Sarah, I began, I thought we would eventually get married and live happily ever after, with both our families' blessings, just like everyone else. But on the day we were supposed to meet her parents for the first time, my mom pulled me aside, looking really worried. She told me I won't agree to this marriage. I was completely puzzled and asked her why. She hesitated for a moment and finally said, "Your astrology signs don't match, and that girl doesn't seem to like you very much anyway." My dad had also gently advised me to consider marrying someone else. At the time, I hadn't listened to either of them, stubbornly thinking that my mom just didn't like Sarah for some reason. So when I insisted on marrying Sarah, and my mom threatened to cut ties with me if I did, I had just assumed she was angry and would eventually come around. Little did I know that for over 10 years after our marriage, we remained completely out of contact. 3 years into our marriage, my dad had called me. He said, "Your mom didn't want you two together because we overheard her on a phone call. Your mom is just too stubborn to reach out, and so are you." I was too caught up in the initial bliss of my new marriage to really care, and never made any effort to reconnect with them. Now, looking back, I finally believed my dad. Maybe my mom had seen something I hadn't. Maybe Sarah had been seeing Mark even before we got married. I chuckled bitterly, a pang of guilt hitting me. "Do you think it's too late to apologize to them now?" Mandy offered a comforting smile and said, "It's never too late, Ben. They're your parents." A small spark of hope flickered within me. One of the main reasons I had hesitated to reach out to my mom was something Sarah had said years ago. When I had asked her the same question about my parents, her response had been cold and dismissive. "This is our home now. Your parents didn't want us together, so why even bother?" I had figured my mom must dislike me as much as Sarah seemed to imply, so I had never made an effort to contact them. But Mandy's simple words gave me a sense of clarity. "I've decided," I said with newfound resolve, "that once I get back from Switzerland, I'm going to apologize to my parents." The photo I had posted earlier had accidentally captured Mandy's silhouette in the background. Friends who were unaware of my recent divorce had commented, "You two are still so in love. Amazing after all these years. I'm so envious of your long-lasting love." Seeing their comments, I realized I needed to clarify things. There were too many individual messages to reply to, so I posted a general status update explaining that Sarah and I had recently gotten divorced. Mandy and I spent a few more days exploring the beautiful landscapes of Finland before heading to Switzerland as planned. In those few short days, we had gotten along incredibly well, like old friends who had known each other for years. We never argued, and we were surprisingly in sync over the smallest things, often thinking the same thoughts or wanting to do the same activities. I couldn't help but remember the stark contrast to my honeymoon trip with Sarah, our only real vacation together. We had argued for 6 out of the 7 days, finding peace only on the flight back home, where silence had become a necessary form of truce. Perhaps everything really was destined to happen the way it did. Even fate had shown us our fundamental incompatibility early on, but I had stubbornly chosen to ignore the warning signs. On our last day in Switzerland, we went skiing in Engelberg, a picturesque mountain resort. Mandy was all geared up and eager to try skiing, even though she admitted she wasn't very skilled yet. She stood at the edge of the beginner slope, cautiously inching her way along. But she was a quick learner. Watching others navigate the gentle incline, she quickly got the hang of it. I stayed close behind her, ready to catch her if she lost her balance and fell. It was a warm, pleasant moment, suddenly interrupted by someone skiing past us at an excessive speed, spraying a wave of snow that was easily over 1 meter high. Instinctively, I turned and shielded Mandy from the blast of icy powder. Once the snow settled, Mandy glanced over my shoulder, a mixture of surprise and amusement on her face. My own field of vision was completely obscured by snow, so I couldn't quite see her expression. She laughed, brushing the snow off my shoulders and head. "What's so funny?" I asked, still a bit disoriented. Mandy wiped the snow off my goggles and pointed towards a nearby clearing. The skier who had caused the unexpected snow wave had apparently lost control and fallen quite spectacularly. I looked at the clumsy figure sprawled out in the snow and chuckled. Then, the skier removed their helmet, and a familiar face was revealed. It was Sarah. She was pouting, looking off into the distance with an air of annoyance. Following her gaze, I noticed Mark standing nearby, also watching us. Maybe my stare was too intense, or perhaps it was just a coincidence, but Sarah suddenly glanced my way too. We made brief eye contact. A flash of what looked like panic crossed her face, but it vanished as quickly as it appeared. I turned away, pretending not to have noticed her, and focused on helping Mandy adjust her skis. Sensing my sudden change in mood, Mandy also became a bit quieter. I lost track of when Sarah, still holding her skis, returned to the starting point of the slope. As Mark was about to push off and ski down, he passed right by us, his skis pointed upwards in a deliberate motion, just like earlier when he had scattered the snow all around us. But this time, we clearly saw his intention. It turned out that Sarah had recognized me, and Mark was purposefully kicking up snow in our direction, clearly trying to be disruptive. I was just about to say something, perhaps even retaliate with a snowball of my own, but Mandy beat me to it. She quickly grabbed a handful of fresh snow from the ground and threw it directly into Mark's face. Before he could even properly glide onto the open slope, he lost his balance and fell again, this time with a surprised yelp. Mandy and I doubled over in laughter, the absurdity of the situation hitting us both. Sarah got up, glared at us with an expression that suggested she wanted to tear us apart limb by limb, but Mandy and I simply didn't care. She even made a silly face at him, sticking out her tongue. Sarah apparently couldn't take it anymore and stomped over to Mandy, her face contorted in anger. "Aren't you going way too far with this? Is this how you blatantly bully people?" Mark followed closely behind Sarah. Instinctively, I pulled Mandy slightly behind me, stepping forward to block Sarah's path. I knew Mandy had thrown the snowball in my defense, so when Sarah started to confront her, I felt the need to step in. Seeing my protective move, Sarah's eyes seemed to turn a bit red, and her voice took on a pitiful tone. "Ben, why are you defending her?" I let out a short, sarcastic laugh and retorted, "Should I be defending you instead, Sarah?" Sarah pointed at me with a trembling hand, her voice rising in indignation. "Ben, we've been married for so long. How can you possibly take someone else's side over mine?" I impatiently reminded her, "Did you somehow forget that we are already divorced? Do I need to read you the divorce papers again?" Sarah was left speechless, her mouth slightly agape. Then, Mark suddenly interjected, his voice dripping with false righteousness. "Alan, it's bad enough that you treat Sarah like this, but why are you talking to Mandy that way? You've been with Sarah for years. Sneaking here to ski with someone else behind her back is one thing, but now you're blaming her? Have you no shame?" I underestimated Mark's audacity to twist the entire situation around. Dealing with these two pests, my patience was wearing thin incredibly fast. "If you care so much," I said, directing my words at Mark, "maybe you should try to keep her out of trouble, all right?" Mandy added from behind me, "Yeah, exactly." After that rather bizarre encounter, I took Mandy's hand, intending to find a quieter part of the ski resort where we could actually enjoy ourselves. I could hear Sarah yelling my name hopelessly from behind us. "Ben, have you really forgotten all the years we spent together?" I didn't turn back, simply replying over my shoulder, "You're right, I did." We continued walking, or rather skiing, until they were completely out of sight, and I finally let out a long, much-needed sigh. It's not like you can just erase so many years of shared memories, but these recent happy days with Mandy had definitely helped me push aside a lot of the lingering worries and doubts, making my decision to move on feel even more solid. Even though Sarah and I were in the same country traveling around after she had seen my divorce note, she hadn't made any real attempt to stop me. When we had run into each other, she had pretended to be sad and heartbroken, just to make a pathetic attempt at winning me back. Mandy, noticing my slightly pale face, offered a comforting smile and said with genuine admiration, "Do you realize how amazing you were just now? It takes real guts to finally say goodbye to your past. I honestly don't know if I could have done that." Her words made my eyes light up with a sense of validation. "Really?" I asked, a hopeful tone in my voice. Mandy nodded firmly, giving me a thumbs up. "Absolutely, you're brave, Ben. You deserve to be happy." I couldn't help but laugh, a genuine, heartfelt laugh that felt good after so much tension. The dark mood I had been carrying around for so long instantly dissolved. I realized she was right. I was brave. After years of being with Sarah, being so used to each other even though I hadn't been truly happy, leaving her definitely took serious courage. And I had finally found it within myself. The short trip to Switzerland went by incredibly fast. Soon, Mandy and I were boarding the plane to head back home. We eventually went our separate ways once we landed in the same city. but we exchanged numbers and promised each other that we would go diving in the Maldives together when spring arrived. Even though we had just said goodbye at the airport, I was already looking forward to our next adventure. It seemed Sarah somehow knew I was back home. I had barely stepped off the plane and into the arrivals hall when I saw her standing there, waiting. I was a bit stunned for a moment, but quickly noticed that Mark wasn't with her. Seeing the question in my eyes, she quickly said, "I fired Mark. I'm completely done with having anything to do with him." I responded softly, a hint of surprise in my voice. "Oh," then added, "What's that got to do with me now?" Sarah hesitated for a moment, not getting angry as I had expected. She silently followed me as I walked towards the taxi stand and hailed a cab. Just then, she asked, her voice a little softer than before, "Ben, are you going to see your parents?" I didn't answer her question, but I think she understood what my silence meant. I didn't bother to engage with her any further. As I got into the back of the taxi, Sarah tried to get in after me, but I gently blocked her way. "Why are you following me home, Sarah?" I asked, shutting the car door before she could even reply. Running into them abroad had been annoying enough. I certainly didn't want her showing up at my place. In the taxi, I dozed off for a little while, but then I realized that Sarah's car was following us. I sighed in frustration, instructing the taxi driver to take a slightly longer, less direct route. Luckily, Sarah had only visited my actual home address once, so she wasn't entirely sure of the exact location. The taxi driver was good, and we managed to lose her car soon after we got closer to my parents' neighborhood. My heart started racing with a mixture of excitement and nervousness. It had been over a decade since I had last seen them. Would they even recognize me? The more I thought about it, the heavier the weight of guilt in my chest became. I didn't even know if they had noticed the small amounts of money I had been sending to their account over the years. As I was lost in my thoughts, the car stopped in front of their house. An elderly figure stood at the front door, gazing out into the distance with a hopeful look in her eyes. I got out of the car and realized it was my mother, whom I hadn't seen in so many years. Her eyesight wasn't as sharp as it used to be, but she recognized me the moment I stepped out of the taxi. She stood there at the door, a little overwhelmed, repeatedly wiping her hands on her clothes. My eyes instantly filled with tears, and one slipped down my cheek. I quickly stepped forward and hugged her tightly. "Mom," I said, my voice thick with emotion. She seemed stunned at first, just staring at me with wide eyes. But when I said that simple word, "Mom," she hugged me back just as tightly, her own tears starting to flow. Dad must have heard the commotion because he came out of the house too, calling my childhood nickname with excitement. We hugged each other and cried, a silent acknowledgement of the years that had passed. But no one mentioned why it had been so long since we had last seen each other. My mom, who looked like she had aged 10 years in my absence, suddenly had a bright smile on her face when she saw me. She seemed more vibrant, more alive. During my time at home, the dining table was always filled with my favorite dishes, the ones she used to make when I was a kid. Mom had even bought a whole bunch of the snacks I loved growing up, just in case I showed up suddenly and there was nothing for me to eat. I noticed some of the snacks were actually quite a bit past their expiration date, but it didn't matter. I tore open a package and ate them in big bites under Mom's hopeful gaze. I ate too fast and choked a little. Mom laughed with pure joy, just like she used to when I was a little boy, and reached out to pat me on the back to help me catch my breath. I joined in her laughter, and soon we were both laughing so hard that tears streamed down our faces. At some point during my stay, Sarah had somehow managed to get my parents' address. I ran into her while I was taking out the trash. I noticed she was going door to door in the neighborhood, holding a note in her hand. A bit annoyed by her persistence, I pulled her aside into a quiet corner. "Sarah, we've broken up. What's the point of all this?" Sarah, still seemingly oblivious to my exasperated tone, stood there looking unsure before finally speaking up. "But Ben, I really don't want to be apart from you. I already fired Mark. If you don't believe me, you can go and ask anyone at the office." She pleaded, her voice filled with desperation. "Please, just don't leave me." I furrowed my brows in frustration, not understanding why she was being so persistent now. I spoke with a clear edge of irritation in my voice. "I don't care if that's true or not, Sarah. Don't you think saying all of this now feels incredibly fake? Saying you don't want to leave me now? What's the point of that? What about everything you did before?" Sarah looked genuinely stunned by my words and didn't respond for a long moment. I remembered her callous words from the past. "Others might be younger and more capable, helping me at work in ways you can't even imagine. But look at you. You're not exactly 18 anymore." Right after saying this, I turned to leave. Sarah tried to step forward and grab my hand, but she seemed to hesitate, unable to muster the courage. She watched me walk away, and then asked one last, almost whispered question. "Ben, do you really not love me anymore?" I stopped walking, but didn't turn back to face her. "The moment you instinctively shielded Mark while leaving the fire," I said, my voice flat and devoid of emotion. "That's when my heart died." After that final, brief encounter, Sarah never appeared in my life again. Later, I heard through a mutual friend that she had somehow gone a bit strange after our breakup, apparently taking out a significant amount of money, $20,000, from her company shares, and donating it all to charity. Hearing this news hardly moved me. I just took it as a somewhat odd and distant piece of information. Winter eventually gave way to spring, and soon it was time for my planned trip to the Maldives with Mandy. We hadn't been in close contact since our trip abroad, but we still met up at the airport as if it had been meticulously planned. We walked together under the warm glow of the sunset at the Maldives airport, the dim lights stretching our shadows long across the terminal floor, much like the seemingly endless possibilities of our lives stretching out ahead, promising to be wild and full of passion.